Hi, I'm Gail Sokol, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about chiffon cake.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
On a previous show, we talked about the category of cakes that contain little or no fat. And these are the sponge cakes using the sponge cake method. And they use egg foams and meringues to actually leaven them. And that's the air inside these egg foams that actually get trapped inside the structure of the cake and help it to rise. So we went over many types of cakes that use the sponge cake method. There were basically two categories: whole egg foams, and we talked specifically about the genoise or the French sponge cake, and separated egg foam cakes. And we talked about the basic sponge cake, where you have to separate your egg from your egg white and your yolk, the angel food cake, and the chiffon cake. So today we're actually going to guide you through an actual chiffon cake from beginning to end, and it's a fabulous recipe. So I chose this type of sponge cake because if you've never made a sponge cake before or made an egg foam or meringue before, this batter is a bit more forgiving because of a special ingredient that you might not expect to be in an egg foam cake. And let's talk about that special ingredient. Chiffon cakes actually have baking powder in them, a chemical leavener. Why would they need this? Because they have an egg foam in them, but chiffon cakes are notoriously light and fluffy, without any dryness or tough texture that some other sponge cakes may have. And that's because they're not only leavened with air, but they have that added additional leavener in the baking powder. So the baking powder will form carbon dioxide, seek out those air cells, and enlarge them. And this way it will all create beautiful leavening. So I chose this type of cake because if you are not confident yet, and notice I said yet, in creating a fluffy egg foam, the added bonus of baking powder will give you a backup of bubbles, even if your egg foam is less than stellar. So if you mess up a little and don't whip it enough, even though you should try to whip it enough, it's a little insurance in an uncertain world of sponge cake, and that's not a bad thing. So chiffon cakes rise beautifully due to this second source of leavening, and I've always had fabulous luck with them. So if you're not a sponge cake lover, try a chiffon cake. Try actually making one. It may change your mind because, to be honest with you, I don't love sponge cakes. All right, the truth came out. I really don't like genoise. I think they're dry. I don't like sponge cake in general or angel food cake, but I know they're wonderful and a lot of people do like them. But a chiffon cake is so different. It's light. It looks like a pound cake, but it's light. It could take wings and fly away. It's so light and tender. So it really is a spectacular type of cake. And you'll see that if you tried making one. Now, the other surprise ingredient in a typical chiffon cake is the addition of oil. It's not butter, it's oil. The oil provides moistness and tenderness, and you can honestly say no other type of sponge cake uses these two special, ingredients, these exceptional ingredients of oil and baking powder in them, especially if they're a sponge method cake. So before I give you the recipe, I'm going to give you a few quick tips for the highest rising chiffon cake. Make sure there's no grease or moisture in the electric mixing bowl when you add your egg whites in there. It's very important. Grease is the enemy of egg whites. Grease will prevent your whites from whipping up into a foam. I once had students, I'm not kidding you, they were making angel food cake and they whipped a dozen egg whites in a bowl for 30 minutes until I came over and said, "What you doing?" And that's never, ever going to whip up because if it takes more than a few minutes, it's not happening. And that's because they didn't clean their bowl out properly. So you have to learn from that. You want to use a 10-inch tube pan specifically to make the cake with the recipe I'm going to give you. And most tube pans will come 9-inch or 10-inch. Most are 10. If you can get a false bottom one, that's the one with the bottom is separate and the tube will come out, it would be even better. But don't grease it. Don't even say, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm going to put a little nonstick cooking spray. Don't do it. Don't do it. You want to leave it ungreased. The batter will rise, climb up the sides only if there's no grease on the sides of the pan. If there's any grease, the batter actually slides back down. It's actually trying to climb a greased rope. You can't do it, so you're going to slide right down. After baking, you'll want to turn the cake upside down and allow it to cool that way. The pan should have metal tabs. I stated that in our sponge cake previous show, and I really want to emphasize it. That's why I'm mentioning it again. And it allows the cake to balance while it cools off the countertop. And if your pan doesn't have tabs, don't worry. Allow the pan to balance either on the middle part of the tube, which usually goes higher than the sides. You can put a ramekin or a can, like a can of vegetables or something, on your countertop, or insert an upright wine bottle through the tube and let that tube hang upside down. Let that cake hang upside down. And it should cool that way until it's completely cool. It should not be warm. So I'm asking, you're probably asking yourself, why am I hanging this upside down? Well, gravity. Gravity is very important to an angel food cake or to a sponge cake or to any type of an egg foam cake. It will keep the cake from collapsing. It will rise. And then if you flip it upside down, the height will stay the same height as it came out of the oven because of gravity pulling it down, especially if it's upside down. So once it's completely cooled, you flip it to the right side. And don't push it out of the pan yet because it won't come out. You're going to have to take a long, skinny, narrow knife and cut around the side. And don't forget to cut around the tube part. A lot of people forget that and they wonder why their cake ripped. So cut around the tube all the way around 360 degrees and then cut around the pan and remove it from that pan. It is the best cake. This chiffon cake. So are you ready? I want to give you this chiffon cake recipe. It is from my first book about professional baking, which is sold all over the world. And it's fabulous. It's a citrus chiffon cake. So it has a lot of citrusy flavor. It's got a combination of citrus juices. So I'm going to begin right now. So what you're going to do is make sure you preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to adjust your oven racks. Don't turn on your oven and then open your oven door to put the cake in and realize your oven racks are not high enough to allow the cake to rise or even allow your cake pan to go in. So adjust your racks accordingly so you have enough to rise with that tube pan. Make sure there's nothing above that tube pan so that they don't bake into the next rack on top. That would be terrible. In the bowl of an electric mixer, using the paddle attachment, you're going to blend in 2 1/4 cups of cake flour, 1 1/4 cups of granulated sugar, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, there's your special ingredient, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You're going to mix that with your paddle because that's the equivalent of whisking. Now on low speed with that paddle attachment, you're going to add in 1/2 cup of canola oil, or any vegetable oil will do. You're going to add in 5 large egg yolks. Okay, 5 large yolks. And you're going to save the whites from those because you're going to need them later. You're going to add in 1/2 cup of orange juice, 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice, 2 tablespoons of fresh lime juice, and then the zest from an orange, a lemon, and a lime. I told you it was citrusy, right? This is really citrusy. And you're even going to add, to boot, 1 teaspoon of lemon extract. So it's really going to be a citrusy flavor. It's wonderful. And you're going to blend this with the paddle until it's smooth. It's going to be a thin batter. And you're going to pour this batter into a very large mixing bowl and set it aside. Next, you're going to clean this electric mixing bowl and whip. Clean it out thoroughly, dry it out thoroughly, because now is the time for the egg whites. Now, you're going to use all the egg whites you used that went with your yolks. So instead of 5 large egg yolks, you're going to need an additional 3. So you're going to need 8 large egg whites. You're going to have to add 3 more egg whites to this. So we need a lot of foam in this cake. So you're going to add 8 large egg whites, hopefully that have been at room temperature. You can leave them for about an hour at room temperature and put them in that clean, dry electric mixing bowl. And using the whip attachment, beat them at high speed until they're foamy, just until you see a foam. Then you're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar. And that's going to help denature the proteins a little and get us a very stable meringue. And you're going to beat until soft peaks form. And then slowly you're going to add 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. And you're going to add that a tablespoon at a time. And then beat it at high speed until you see stiff peaks forming. Again, those peaks should reach straight up when you stop your machine and pull your whip off and put it upside down so you can see it. Using a whisk, you're going to take those egg whites and you're going to pull your beater off and you're going to bring them next to that big bowl of reserve batter. And you're going to blend in about 1/4 of those beaten egg whites into the reserve batter. Again, the light egg whites on top of the heavier batter. And you're going to literally whisk it. And this is sort of the Mr. Spock method of mixing. So you're going to actually sacrifice 1/4 of those beaten egg whites. They'll lose a little of their air, but the best thing they'll do is they'll lighten up that heavier batter. In preparation for the remaining egg foam to go over that lightened batter. And then you're going to take the remaining egg foam, put it over the lightened batter, and this time, not a whisk, a rubber spatula, and you're going to fold it in gently. And rotate your bowl as you're folding it in so you don't see any streaks of meringue. And then you're going to pour the batter evenly into an ungreased, false bottom, 10-inch tube pan with metal tabs, if possible. And you're going to bake this. You're not going to let it go. You're not going to wait because sponge cakes wait for nobody or else you'll lose air. And you're going to put it in the center of your that middle rack. And you're going to bake it for 50 to 60 minutes, almost an hour. But bake it 50 minutes first. And it should bake until a small, sharp knife inserted into the center comes out clean. All right. And remove the cake from the oven and allow it to cool upside down completely. And remove the cake from the pan, place it right side up onto a serving platter, and it will be more tender than your typical sponge cake. Just be aware of that. So try making this citrus sponge. This will be a great learning tool for you to get your feet wet, so to speak, with an egg foam and a sponge cake method cake using an egg foam and get your feet wet using that, these methods and getting used to what it's like to separate eggs and what it's like to fold light on top of heavy. So if you've enjoyed the episode today, hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, head on over to bakingradio.com and leave me a message. I would love to answer some of your questions on air.